Hello there, commanders, and welcome to another episode of SUNTZU Podcast. This time we are going to discuss our feature wish list. And joining me today are George.
Hello.
And Astolfo.
Hello, beautiful people.
So we're just going to go straight into it, YOLO Mid Rush style. And the first feature on my wish list are campaigns. So they will basically work as they work in World of Warships. It's not like a single player campaign in Total War, which I know a lot of people were actually requesting for whatever reason. But no, these campaigns would be a sets of missions that you have to complete a stage of the campaign, and then after you complete X amount of stages, you complete the campaign, and you get rewards for every single mission. You get rewards for completing every single stage, and then for completing the entire campaign, and it could get bigger and bigger, obviously. So let's say you would have a campaign based on Alexander's conquest of Persia, where you have those different battles like battles of Ipsus, Gaugamela, conquest of Egypt and Babylon and India at the end. And yeah, you would have missions loosely tied to those events. Obviously, we don't have Persia and India in the game yet. Maybe in the future. So you can't really have those, but yeah, just some missions based or that require you to use Greek commanders or certain unit types. But also, missions that can be completed with anything. So if someone absolutely hates Greeks, they can still complete the campaign. So guys, what do you think?
Well, I mean, we can certainly see the feature like that working in most games that it's been tried in, like the wargaming games, and also in like Conqueror's Blade, for example. They have a similar sort of campaign-esque missions. In that case, they unlock units, but in the case of Total War Arena, it could be cosmetics that I know we'll touch on later in the podcast, probably. But it could also be some form of premium units or something like that we do see in the wargaming titles. So I think there's a lot of potential with that, with the feature, and it's probably a reasonably realistic add-on to expect.
Yeah, I do think that's like a pretty natural place to expand to. Astolfo, your thoughts?
Personally, I agree with it. I like it. You also mentioned that you would be able to complete it with, any faction if you absolutely don't play one of the factions, which I think would be good because a lot of people will pick a favorite faction and only play that faction. But also, it could be an optional feature, right? If they don't want cosmetics for that faction, they don't have to play it, right? So I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, basically, you just get some rewards like maybe 1, 3, or 7 days of premium, depending, on the difficulty of the missions, and some silver, some gold, whatever, right? Some minor rewards that are in no way essential but are nice to have. And obviously, like in World of Warships, you have those missions that you can only complete this mission if you have tier 9 or tier 10 Russian battleship, and that's so specific. If you are not like at the end of your research tree, right, you cannot complete that mission. So it kind of sucks, but it's still okay because there are other missions that you can complete even if you don't have those Russian battleships. So the same here. If you don't have tier 10 arches, tier 10 Greek arches even, it's still okay. You don't have to grind tier 10 arches just in order to be able to complete the campaign. You can just complete it with other units. So that should definitely be taken into account when designing those. Okay, I think that's...
Yeah,
Judge?
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously, you don't want to make it like too locked by specifics. I mean, obviously, you have got to think about what the reward is. For example, when talking about, you'd have to have like tier 10 Greek archers, for example, to complete a certain part or certain campaign as a whole. It wouldn't be such of a problem if the reward was, say, a skin for Kinane, because then chances are, wanting the skin on Kanane, you'd already have something like the tier 10 Greek archers. And also thinking about what the campaigns could actually be, obviously there's a lot of things in the game where you could have some kind of there's lots of campaigns, obviously, that involve the factions that are already in the game. For example, you could have a campaign that gives you a Germanicus skin that involves obviously what Germanicus did historically, i.e., targeting barbarian commanders in battles, for example, and killing a certain number of units could get you a Germanicus skin. And in the same way as what I said with the Kanane, you would be able to avoid a lot of the people wanting to unlock something but not having the prerequisites to do so, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, actually, I really like that. So yeah, a mission specific, one mission that tells as Germanicus kill 3 barbarian commanders during a battle, for example. And
Yeah,
then
something like
that
that.
completes the mission, and that little mission gives you, maybe that one gives you the skin, and maybe it's reward for a stage. Well, that's just, details that we don't have to discuss. It's just that general idea that we are presenting. Astolfo, anything to add, or should we move to another feature?
You guys handled it well.
Okay. So my next feature are banners, and they would work kind of like they do in Total War Warhammer, and kind of like signals in World of Warships or doctrines in Conqueror's Blade, if you guys are familiar with any of those games. So essentially, it's a small buff that you put on top of a unit. It's kind of also like a consumable, but consumables are always replenished with silver, while banners, could be earned with by a different way. Like in World of Warships, for example, you get banners, signals for getting achievements in battles, but you can also get them with silver if you're not good enough to get those achievements. So that's also, fair, because if they're giving you certain buffs, they should be available for everyone, even if you're not good enough to get those achievements consistently. You shouldn't be denied from access to those buffs. So that definitely has to be taken into account when designing that feature. And yeah, they would also, show up in the game itself, similar to how it works in Rome 1 Total War, for example, where, units would just carry small banners, and back in the day they would represent the upgrades to not just their experience or the upgrades to weaponry and armor. I believe that's how it worked. So in a similar fashion, just that these would be visible in game, just like signals are visible on top of the ship. So guys, thoughts about that feature?
I think it would be a great feature, and it would really help the customizability of your units, give it another layer. And additionally, it is historical. It was kind of an honor to be a standard bearer in many armies. And you could have it as a reward for certain things, like to link back to the campaigns, you could get a banner for completing a campaign. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, more like a bunch of banners, because it's not like you get one banner and then you can use it an unlimited number of times. It's also more like, I would imagine more like World of Warship style, where you have, well, I don't know what ideas for banners, but whatever, Alexander banner, right? Or like, Memora from a campaign, or I don't know, Legio 13 banner, whatever. And then you put it on top of a unit, right? And you have 10 of those. So that's enough for 10 battles. And then you can run out of those and you need to buy more with silver, or just get the achievement that unlocks it. Hey, George, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how they would implement it exactly, the banner system. Obviously, the nature of the game, there's lots of different ways that you could add something like that. For example, you could have it where it's hovers over the ability, like next to hovers over the unit, sorry, next to where like the name of the unit is, or you could have it that someone in the unit is actually like holding the banner, although that would sort of create like a dead model, because obviously he wouldn't be able to fight really. So that would be something obviously the game development team would have to come up with a solution for, of how they want to implement it specifically.
I mean, definitely nothing like gameplay intrusive that would, the guy actually carries the banner so he cannot fight anymore. That would be kind of stupid. So yeah, just have it pure cosmetically displayed. So when you zoom in, you can actually see those. And it could introduce a little bit of an issue where you don't really see those banners when you're fully zoomed out. It's like, oh, I don't know, does this unit have, plus 5% buff to their melee weapon damage? Or do they have the plus 5 armor? Do they have both? I don't know, because I can see it. But then again, you don't see what kind of equipment they pick up on. And the only way you can tell is click on the unit and see, the stats summary, which those banners would be included in as well. So I think it would be good enough. And it wouldn't be that much of an issue.
If you think of the world of warships, right? Like, I don't exactly go into the sniper mode and scroll in like 25 times to see what flags my opponent is running generally, so you wouldn't necessarily have to make it obvious, only if you really wanted to sort of know that kind of thing, then you could make it possible. But again, like you said, the equipment is impossible to view, and also the consumables that the person has added to their units is impossible to see as well, apart from if you know the nuances of the
no.
Unit
if you click on the unit, there's a unit info panel, and
it
you actually can see that. That's what I wanted to point out. Yes. So in World of Warships, there's just no way to see what kind of commander perks the enemy has, what kind of signals, unless you zoom really closely, and what kind of upgrades on the ship there are. It's impossible in World of Warships. So for example, you start a fire on a guy, right? And then you don't know whether this fire will end in 30 seconds or in 60 seconds, depending on what kind of abilities the guy has. But in Total War Arena, it's much better because you can actually do that. You have the information available. Obviously, it's a lot of information. So if you were to make that information available at a glance for everyone, you just wouldn't be able to see anything anymore, because there's just a shit ton of information, right? You cannot display it all. And Total War Arena has actually found, a pretty perfect way of doing it with the stat summary that you can then, expand and see each individual stat. So it's another pretty neat solution that Total War Arena has that other games don't have. But okay, I think that's enough about the banners, unless you guys want to add anything, and you can move to another one.
No, I think we've covered that one pretty nicely.
Stolfo?
Fleshed it out. It's good.
So my next feature are flags, which sounds similar to banners, but there's a different important distinction to make, that banners are the little buffs you put on top of the unit, while flags are purely cosmetic. So yeah, just basically what I want to say with this feature is go wild with cosmetics. Do flags, do commander skins that are more daring, instead of just kind of a different clothes, just change hairstyles, change hair colors. I mean, we have dark hair Kanana, but that's about it. But give me loose hair Kanana. Go crazy with clothes, faces, set hairstyles, boob sizes. That will sell. Just go crazy with skins and add flags as another cosmetic type. Guys?
I mean, I think flags has great potential, because obviously a lot of these commanders, especially for example, Greece and the barbarians, they're sort of bundled into that umbrella term of Greek or barbarian. Whereas you could see a lot of flags of the specific barbarian factions, for example, like Suebi or Iceni or whatever, depending on the commanders that are added to the game. And with Greek, obviously, you could have some kind of like Macedonian flag or Epirus or Sparta, that sort of thing. And I think that would be really good, and also something that I believe people coming from games like Rome 2 would be especially interested in.
Yeah, actually, you reminded me of something I forgot to mention, how they would look, right, in the game. So what I imagine it as would be either something that you have in Three Kingdoms, where, units just carry a lot of those flags or banners or whatever you want to call them. But, in terms of our nomenclature here, it's called them flags. So a unit just carries a bunch of flags, and, those flags could be in terms of, Greek factions. They could be, Sparta, Athens, etc. In terms of Roman faction, the Julii, Brutii, and Scipii factions from old school Rome 1. Those would definitely be loved by fans. And yeah, speaking of Rome, if they were to look differently, they could look like the banners that were attached to units in Rome 1, Medieval 2, and in the prior titles. Where we essentially had one banner representing the unit. Right now, we just have a nameless floating circle with the unit type displayed on it, with bars representing morale, health, and ammunition. Right. Previously, it was a nice banner that started flashing white when the unit was retreating. You actually, felt more personal than it is right now. Obviously, I see the advantages of the now system, but yeah, having them look like the old school banners from Rome 1, definitely a big plus for old school fans of the War franchise. Astolfo, what do you think?
I think it's a great idea. One thing, as with all cosmetics, which I'm sure I will touch on later or others will, I think there should be a historical mode button. But outside of that, I think it's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, to be honest,
if you really wanted to play your Roman legion as a specific legion, that would be so cool to get a flag or a banner of that legion, right? Like that. Those small things are the things that sell me on games.
Yeah, like an eagle banner for a specific cohort or something. That'd be quite interesting. I mean, I've just thought of these just now. There's so many ideas that come. I'm sure have come into all of our heads. You going back to the Rome 1, and I'm just thinking about these legion stuff. And the potential is clearly there. If we're just coming up in just in a few minutes, we're coming up with all of these ideas that you could add for these sort of cosmetics.
Yeah, obviously, well, you touch on the historical mode, right? And we were only proposing the historical stuff, so, like legions for Romans, Athens, Sparta for Greeks, etc. But yeah, we can go wild with it, surely. So we can have national flags, right? I can carry a Polish flag or French flag on top of my units, and I don't care if they're Romans, barbarians, or whatever. I want a French flag on top of my unit when I'll have it, right? But then you can go even crazier with those flags. Like, for example, World of Warships did, where they have, collaborations with different titles like Azure Lane, and they have an Azure Lane flag. So, yeah, Total Arena can go for the same kind of opportunity. Do a Fate collaboration. Right? Astolfo? With me?
I'm in full
we all
support.
knew it was coming.
I thought you were going to talk a bit more on it.
You're the Fate Arena guy, right? You even made a banner for it.
Oh, I know, dude. All my stream stuff was all Fate related.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next feature. Astolfo, what's on your list?
So the first one the next two are kind of in the same boat, but the first one was custom skins. If you've ever played any of the Dawn of War games, you could have a custom skin. So, for example, if they don't sell, I don't know, I guess a Starbucks logo in the shop, you could always put in a Starbucks logo on your flag. And, that was in Dawn of War, it wasn't client side, so everyone could see it, but it would also be one of those things that you could toggle off with the historical mode, so it wouldn't be oppressive. But as a caveat, I think it would really only be a Western release thing because, clearly people could abuse that and put it, whatever they want as their emblem. So I think that's more of a Western release thing.
I mean, that, to be honest, could be problematic in the West as well, since we maybe are not as restrictive as China, but there are still certain boundaries. George?
Yeah, of course there is, right? And you'd probably have to come up with some sort of filter or, a report system. You can report someone and then they can see what flag they've uploaded, and if it's inappropriate, well, it's a pretty cut and dry ban.
Yeah, or maybe just an approval process, sort of like Twitch has when you upload your emotes. Depending, on the workload that would actually put on the team.
You could also make it something you earn or you have to pay for to do, right? Something like that too. That way, you make money from it, and it goes through your filter to see if it's appropriate or not, and then it can be implemented. I don't know.
Or if we're talking custom, so maybe not entirely custom, but customizable. So you get a tool that allows you to create a custom banner, but only, you know, from available assets. Something like Bannerlord has. If you heard about the banner creation.
Bannerlord's a good example. I mean, even if we're going a little bit out there, the one that immediately popped to my mind, I'm not sure why, is the Europa Universalis for Custom Nation Designer. I mean, they have, I think, 4 different options for customizing your like banner. They have like 120 logos you can choose from, which can range from like emblems or symbols like Norse runes and stuff. And then they also have options that allow you to put a pattern on it, so like striped or diagonal stripes or a cross or something. And then they have 3 different color options, and so you can really make something that's unique in that. And as well, like Bannerlord, you said, has another good way. So definitely there are people out there that have already done something like that, and that have already shown that you can make this kind of customizable banner feature. But again, I do agree that although I do think that customization is good, there has to be some way of like restricting the possibilities of people. And the design is a good idea, and also the vetting process, and even putting a small fee on something like that if you're going to make it completely customizable. For example, the in-game designer could be free, but if you want to upload your own unique one, that could cost like a small token price, and that would reduce the workload of people having to check these kind of things, because someone creating like a free account for a free game, you could upload whatever you want, and you could be quite nasty with what you upload. And if it's just free and you can just keep on doing it, then I can imagine the workload for something like that would be quite high. But even just putting a token price on it would discourage a lot of people using that feature to troll people with.
Mm-hmm. So, speaking of colors and customization, Astolfo?
All right, my next feature was a paint feature for units. So if you didn't want to go down the route of full-blown skins and such, which I think you should, obviously toggleable for historical or non. But I remember in the original one, specifically my Greek spears, I wanted to make Theban themed. I wanted them to be Theban sacred band. But they just picked a random color and called it Theban. It was like a weird, really light blue with green in it. And I was like, how is that tied to Thebes at all, right? So you could do a paint feature for your units with, obviously a pre-loaded set of colors. Again, this is from like basically the Dawn of War game that I referenced to earlier. You could customize the colors of your units and pretty much from head to toe, right? But it was blocked off, right? Like a chest plate could only be metallic colors. Clothing could be pretty much any color. Obviously, you don't want bright pink breastplates running around in a historical game. But, I mean, if you wanted to do that, again, add a historical toggle, and every party would be happy with it.
Yeah, I mean, they did do that in Steam, kind of. Like, you also had, pre-selected by the developers a set of colors, but you could assign, any color to any unit. And also what I really liked about the Steam iteration of it is that, or rather the first Steam iteration, because it was both during Steam and then they changed it. But essentially you could apply, okay, maybe I'm not getting my history right here. Maybe it was just skins for Wargaming that changed it. Anyway, what I want is having a separate color for each unit. So I want rainbow, essentially. I want green unit, I want red unit, and I want a yellow unit. And I don't want them all to be red, all green, or all yellow. I want 3 different colors. Basically, more customization, so I can have 3 different, 3 different schemes. And as I said, the rainbow, just go for RGB, just like you have in Shogun 2 Avatar Conquest mode, where once you have a veteran unit, you can paint them in any color. I believe there you could have because you could have picked like primary color and a secondary color. And I also, on the side, will say that I really hope they will finally implement it in Warhammer, which was created for Army Painter, and it still somehow isn't there. Weird. Anyway, George, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just further on with the customization, I support increased customization as long as they have that historical mode that people on their own clients can disable seeing, these like pink hoplites running around. Because then you've got nothing to lose really. The people that do want this feature, they can paint their units like a rainbow color, or the color of their national flag, or something like that, if they want to. But then again, if you're not one of those people, fine, turn it off. There you go. Your units are looking clean, historical, just the way you want them. And yeah, there's not a lot to lose if it's done in a sensible way, in my opinion. So it's one of those features that I hope will be very likely to be added, because I think it has great potential.
Yeah, I think there are like two camps developing in here. So either have the historical accuracy button that enables you to, toggle on and off whether you want to see others people customization or not. And then when you have that button, let the people that want to, go crazy, right? Or maybe don't have the historical accuracy button, or maybe not for the colors themselves, but only allow those, historical or semi-historical color variations. So yeah, I don't really think one is clearly superior than the other. It's just pick one of the two rather than not have it at all, like you don't have right now.
I'll personally use both of them myself. Like I would sometimes use historical and sometimes not, depending on how I'm feeling. So
to be honest, yes, there is a way to introduce both at the same time. Yes. So they could do that.
I don't want, my RGB units running around all the time. It is a historical game. I will turn on the historical mode probably, honestly, 30 to 40% of the time. And I'm one of the guys who's coming up with the idea to make my RGB units, right? So it's not like that feature will not be used.
Yeah, so how I would see that work is essentially you have like two tabs, let's say, for coloring units. One is the RGB tab where you can just go crazy, and the other one is the historic tab that you are more confined with your choices. And then if someone enables the historic accuracy button, it would disable the RGB choices, but it would still display you the historical choices that someone made. So that people's customization is not entirely removed by just one click of a button of a guy who doesn't want to see it. Although maybe if someone really hates all kinds of customization, maybe introduce a button for him to remove all kinds of customization. But that could also, you could argue that removes the selling point of it, because people want to buy it so that other people can see it. It's not always. Some people just buy it for themselves. I want my units to look cooler, and I don't care how they look on other people's screens, but some people care about that. And if you allow people to completely remove that, then you may be removing one of the selling points. And it's essentially balance between trying to make everyone happy while it's not essentially 100% possible to make everyone happy. But hey, you can keep trying, right?
Of course.
That. And I mean, that's something you could change over time too, depending on feedback as well.
True. I mean, although it's kind of a gray area because it's something you pay for, and okay, I paid for the skin and now you kind of change how the skin works. So, I don't know if I really want it anymore. So, they have to be careful with that, and, maybe some refund policies, or, be upfront that, hey, you are buying it, but be aware it can change, so.
Right, game system, you get 3 refunds of anything you purchase, but you only get 3 on the account ever, never to be increased to 4 or whatever. You get 3 times of, ooh, I messed up.
Yeah, there's a couple of games that have that kind of policy, and that sort of thing. I can see it working because, as a company, you're not losing, lots of money by people just buying something, trying it for like 5 minutes, realizing they don't like it, and refunding it. But it does allow people to, in the long run, you could end up making more money with a feature like that, because people will think, oh, well, I could try out this feature, and I'm not sure if I want to spend my money. But in the long run, if people try it, if the people are more likely to buy it in the first place and try it out and actually end up liking it and keeping it. I think if you have that kind of limited refund policy where it's very sort of cast iron and definite, these are the rules, this is how it's going to stay.
Yeah, you have a lower barrier to entry to try those features.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you worded it a lot better than I managed to do in a few seconds when I had like a minute. So
Yeah, I also really like that idea. Basically, have the back option. And it's basically a safety net, right? If I don't end up liking it or they change it to the point I don't like it anymore, I can always back up from that, no harm done, and then I get my gold back and I can spend it on a premium unit that I would like instead, right? And if I have that sort of a safety net, I'm more willing to buy it in the first place. Okay, so let's move on to the next feature. This one is going to be from me, and it's an observer mode for custom battles. And that's pretty much self-explanatory, nothing much to say there. For tournament organizers to, well, basically not interfere with their random cavalry spotting and stuff like that. Guys, what do you think? Okay, that's too much straightforward. There's nothing really to debate. Do you want it or not in the game? Do you think it's important to have it or meh?
I mean, I think it's I'm no computer programmer, but it seems like a relatively easy feature to add to a game like Arena. And so I think there's not a lot you can sort of lose by adding that kind of feature, apart from people sort of like using it to sort of snipe in a way, like get your friend to have a look at what the enemy team's doing or something. But in the grand scheme of things, I think that the ability for people to be able to like commentate on games, especially if they're like competition games, which I know that like obviously SUNTZU is quite interested in as a community, those sort of tournaments, and obviously having an observer mode is a lot better than having someone with tier 1 units sitting in the corner. So yeah, I think it'll be a positive thing.
Yeah, the thing you mentioned with sniping, it actually isn't a problem because as I said, I specified it's for custom battles only, where you have everything under control and you see who would be an observer, right? So it's not like you can join as an observer and be hidden from everyone.
Be able to see when they join the lobby, who's going on. Yeah, okay. I see.
So that's not an issue. It's in a completely controlled environment, so it's not an issue at all. But funny you mentioned it because they did introduce an observer mode for actual live battles with a 3-minute delay, but still, back in the day, and I think it still is a feature, but in a different game mode. But whatever, it's still an issue because I can start playing a battle. I can have a friend that 3 minutes later jumps into that battle as an observer and tells me enemy artillery position, which is not likely to change in 3 minutes, right? Or when someone deployed stakes inside a tall grass, he can toggle, to the enemy view, and those stakes are also likely to not have disappeared within the next 3 minutes, depending on where they are. So that is actually a game-breaking feature, and I told them that back in the day, and they still haven't removed it because they apparently don't see a problem with people, actually using it for sniping. So I'm happy you brought it up, George. But let's keep on the topic of actual features and implanting them in the game rather than removing the shitty features that are right now. Astolfo, your thoughts about the observer mode?
Personally, love observer modes. I've always loved them. Being able to download a replay makes it so much easier to do commentary or whatever you want on. It just makes so much more availability to content creation. I would say that for live games that are public, it should be a replay download thing instead of a spectate thing. And for custom games, you should be able to have spectate, and it should be up to the tournament organizers and rule makers to hold people accountable. Because if you have someone cheating in a tournament, they shouldn't be in the tournament in the first place.
I mean, as long as you are a tournament organizer, right, and you host the lobby, or you have a judge or referee that hosts the lobby, they can easily control it. They see everyone who is an observer, not a problem, as long as the feature is actually designed that way. But I really doubt CA would be stupid enough to implement it in a different way. And funny you mentioned replays. That is actually something that I also had in mind, but I forgot to write it down. So let me briefly talk about the replays. You can obviously, you have the replay download sort of thing, where everyone on your friends list, now you can go to replays, you can see your own replays, and you can see your friends' replays. And you can already view your friends' replays. So for content creation, it's already there actually. And I already used it for, like Battle of the Week. Someone submitted to me. It's like, yo, this battle was great, go watch it. And then I did. So yeah, that's already there, and that's pretty great. So thank you, CA, for implementing that. But an improvement to replay system is to have them backwards compatible with previous patches. That sort of thing was still there in Napoleon Total War. So I can launch Napoleon Total War now, and I can still watch my replay from 2010 when the game came out, and it still will be exactly as it happened then, even though there were like 20 patches in between. No issue. So it is possible in Total War games to have replays that are backwards compatible. They just don't work like that in Total War Arena and in newer games. I believe Shogun 2 also had backwards compatible replays until they introduced Fall of the Samurai. Once the Fall of the Samurai update came, all the replays from older patches broke. So yeah, I would just like the backwards compatible replays, because that would be great for content creation as well, where you have a really cool battle, but the patch is tomorrow and you just don't have time to record it today, and well, then it's gone.
So, this one's close to my heart because I tried to do a League of Legends series, a Road to Diamond series, and I went something like, I had 20 games that I had played and saved, and I had only lost 2 of them. And it was going amazingly. The patch hit, and all the files were gone, and I was like, why?
Yeah, now that you mentioned it, it actually reminds me that I think since Warhammer 1 or 2, they introduced a feature along the way that you can actually go back on a patch, where you just right-click the game in Steam, go Properties, and then you can, where you have betas to select, you can actually select previous patches. But I don't know how far back it goes, because I never really used it, never had a reason to. But
on Steam, I believe you can go back as far as you like. I know for certain games you definitely can go back as far as you like, but I don't know for how that would work, because of the way you launch the game now. Obviously, it's kind of like a standalone thing. I don't know how that would work, but
yeah, the implementation itself in Arena can be iffy. That's why I think just make the replay so that they're backwards compatible with newer patches or older patches. Newer patches. Instead of actually reverting the game to a previous patch just to watch a replay. That's way more of a hassle, both for the users themselves and for the developers. So yeah, just make the replays just the way they were up to Napoleon, when they just fucking worked. So I think we can agree on that, and let's go to the next feature. George, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the future we all agreed that we would like obviously new game modes, and obviously that would be more of a content rather than a feature. And so thinking about features that would come with something like that, something like in World of Tanks, which I'm sure quite a few people have played, where you can disable certain game modes, and obviously that could be quite a good feature, because I know myself included, when we're playing World of Tanks, where I don't do very much now, but when I used to, there are certain game modes that I just didn't like. And so when you have a button like that, you can disable. You can't disable like the standard game mode, but you can disable these like additional game modes that you don't particularly like. And so, if they do start adding new game modes to Arena, which we hope they do, so for example, the original just capture the flag standard battle, um, maybe even some other sort of battles like an encounter battle with one base in the middle, just a single base that you have to fight over. Um, or, obviously that's for different people to theorize, but an ability to disable these additional game modes if they're just simply not to your liking.
Yeah, true. I mean, I don't really know what to think of that feature. I mean, it's definitely a good concept, but that comes with game health, queue times, etc. Whether you would,
Yeah,
I
it
imagine you
definitely
would need to
becomes
have a one
problem to
queue.
smaller games. Yeah.
Yeah, but in World of Warships and World of Tanks, you have one queue for just random battles, and then you just get randomly assigned to one of those battles, right? And in terms of
Yeah.
World of Tanks and World of Warships, you have obviously a big enough player base to not have to worry about queue times and being able to fill different game modes even if people have disabled them. So as long as Arena
Also show
has
how many players are queuing for that game mode, so you don't waste your time queuing for something that doesn't have anyone in it.
yeah, but you would have one queue essentially. So let's say there are 60 people in queue, right? And the matchmaking wants to make one of those newer game modes, but a lot of people have it disabled, right? So it can't really make it. But I think as long as you write the matchmaking code right and you have just a decent amount of people in the queue, even like 60, right, which you need only 20 to make a game, you'll be fine. So is that it for this feature? Well, we can move on to the other then, and I'll take this one. And in terms of gameplay modes, I would like to see historical battles. So again, maybe it's content, maybe it's feature, I don't care. I want historical battles. And Total War fans are already familiar with the concept, where instead of a standard random battle in Total War Arena, where you have a mixture of all kinds of factions, units, and whatever, you would have sort of a scenario that would obviously need to be initially balanced so that it's still okay. But yeah, you would have actual faction versus faction. So Rome versus barbarians, Rome versus Carthage, Greece versus, well, also Rome. I mean, that's kind of an issue. Rome have fought everyone, but the other factions didn't really fought each other. Maybe Carthage and barbarians a little bit. Yeah, Greeks versus barbarians, not that much of a thing. They didn't really have any big famous battles between each other. So yeah, the historical actual side of it might be a little bit of an issue because Rome, you queue up as Rome units and you have much shorter queue time, I guess, because you can fill into every battle, every scenario, not necessarily for the others. That could be an issue, I just noticed. But yeah, overall, that could be a cool feature for people to play. Maybe as a custom battle. Then again, that's justified development time. Anyway, guys, what do you think?
I mean, obviously, you could just thinking you could tie it into what you said earlier about campaigns. Somehow they are linked into these historical battles. Maybe like the final thing you have to do in these campaigns is fight one of these historical battles or something. I'm not specifically saying to lock them just for those scenarios, but that could be like a final challenge or something. And I also think with these historical battles, you have to be careful how you do it. Because even though there is like content from the Total War series of games where you can play like historical battles that are like sort of pre-made, I remember distinctly, ones from the Shogun and Napoleon. I'm not quite sure about the other games. I can't remember any specifically. But you have to be careful with the balancing of these type of things. Do you want to make it very historical and say that, well, to join this historical battle, you need to have these units, these specific, say, Roman units? Or are you going to have it more general, where it's simply barbarians versus Romans within these sort of tiers?
Yeah, okay. So as you were speaking, I actually had an idea of how to fix that. So we could make it a PvE, but let's go back to PvP, right? If you were to do it PvP, World of Tanks did historical battles, and I know it didn't really work out for them.
Yeah, I think
But
that was a balancing issue mainly because they tried to go for very historical, and that ended up with uh, basically they had certain tanks that were historically in the battle, but because of the way they were implemented in the game, it was simply completely unbalanced. I remember there was one historical mode where it was Americans versus Germans, and one of the German tanks that was historically there at the time, it was simply impregnable to the American tanks that faced it historically and because of the game. And so you've got to be careful with. Obviously, that's quite an extreme problem that was with the game, that it was simply impossible. But obviously, you've got to think about balancing the from a game point, from standard games and the historical. You've got to make sure they tie in.
Well, just from the Total War series alone, you can look at some of the historical battles like Rome 2 at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. I'm gonna let you know right now, if those are real barbarian players, they're gonna massacre the Romans that were, in a thin column, have very little maneuvering room.
okay, well, anyway,
Yeah,
going back to what I was saying, we can make it a PvP, and if you were to make it PvP, make sure the tiers are equal on the on both sides, obviously. And in terms of historical accuracy and it's much easier to implement a balanced historical battle in Total War Arena setting rather than it is in World of Tanks setting, where you have like Tigers, which is tier 7, versus T-34s, which is tier 5, and you don't actually can have them outnumbering like 5-1 or whatever it was. But yeah, in terms of the arena, much easier if you make it PvP, but you can also make it PvE and make it because also it would have to be a separate queue, and obviously queue size, etc., etc. So PvE would actually solve a lot of those problems. And World of Tanks, World of Warships has a very good implementation of it in, I think they're called scenarios, expeditions, either of those.
Yeah, the weekly ones.
Yes, essentially you have a weekly rotation of a set of scenarios. Let's call them scenarios, since those are scenario battles, historical battles in Total War franchise. So yeah, you can have 1 week, you have the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, and it's players playing as barbarians and going against Romans. Or maybe next week you can have also Teutoburg Forest, but this time as Romans versus barbarians, and it's basically PvE. AI has been vastly improved compared to a wargaming version, so it can actually pose a challenge. And yeah, it can be entertaining as long as they balance it and make it a interesting way. Also, historical battles in Shogun 2, Fall of the Samurai, some of them at least, were real like stage based, where you move from one battle stage to the next.
Yeah,
I like something like that, and I think it would be great addition into the arena. Then again, you also need to balance, to not make it too lucrative to go for those, because I know that's World of Warships problem right now, where they had to actually decrease the amount of rewards you get from those PvE battles, because people on tier 6 and 7 were basically just farming PvE because they wanted to avoid matchmaking, because matchmaking would put them against tier 8, tier 9s when they're in tier 6 and 7. So they usually get wrecked, and in PvE they get the same fun, and at least they don't get to fight unequal battles against players with higher tier units. And even if they face a higher tier ship, it's still balanced within the game mode itself, right? So it's a nifty implementation on how to make it still attractive for the players to play it, an interesting thing to play, and have it be rewarding, but still not take away too many players from the main game mode itself. But that's, again, details, and we just throw the general ideas, and if CA likes it and wants to pick up that idea, well, they can fine-tune the details themselves and with our help as well. But let's not do all of it in one place, which is this podcast. Astolfo, any thoughts?
No, man, I think you covered it.
So let's move on to the next feature, and it's also mine feature. And it's Shogun 2 feature that I was requesting ever since Steam days. Dojos. I want dojos in the game. I think they would be great addition. And basically how it would work is the same way it did in Shogun 2, where you have dojos in balanced places on the maps, where they're equal distance from each team. So each team has a fair chance of fighting for all of those dojos. And yeah, they basically give you a boost. So you can capture a temple, and temple gives you a morale boost. You can capture a weaponsmith, and that gives you an attack damage buff. You can capture armorsmith. Is that a thing? I don't know. Armory. There we go. And that gives you boost to armor. Archery dojo for archers, better reload. And though maybe you would need to make the dojos more generic so that they can benefit every single unit no matter what you have. So you don't have a specific archery dojo, but just give it to like weaponsmith. And if you capture that, if you're playing infantry, you get melee attack or melee damage. And if you're playing archers, you get, missile damage instead. Thoughts, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I really liked the feature from Shogun 2. I mean, you could see that it was a very popular feature. I mean, a lot of people liked that kind of element where, depending on sort of what units you could have, you would decide to focus on one dojo or something, which wouldn't be quite as possible in Arena as you said before with the obviously the dojos would have to be much more generic to benefit all of the different units you could have on a singular team. But I definitely think that having a feature like that, it would tie very nicely into what they've done already on Arena. With the addition of the additional capture points rather than just the bases. With the A, B, C, D, E. That would work lovely. You could have the B point might give you an offensive boost, and the C point might give you the defensive or something like that. The possibilities are there, and obviously the previous content already in another Total War game. You have that kind of past experience with the feature to sort of nail down the specifics of how you might want to adapt it to a specific arena setting.
Yeah, I wouldn't tie it necessarily to the capture points themselves. Just make dojo a separate building that stands on its own.
I think that might be
also,
quite
yeah,
difficult.
that idea originated before that new game mode was implemented. And yet the capture points are kind of like dojos, which are interest points on the map that you need to fight for. But dojos themselves don't really translate into winning the game. They just help you.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of capture points, they are directly correlated to winning the game by points. By reaching the 3,500.
Because obviously, if you had these separate, if you say you had 2 dojos in a game, which would be sort of like the bare minimum, then you're talking about 7 capture points and 2 bases. You're having like 9 areas you could capture. You'd struggle to find enough sort of dead zone, if that makes any sense, because you do want that kind of dead space on the map where you can fight and it's not over a specific like objective. You do want that area where the whole map isn't just capture point after capture point. And so it would be a delicate balance, but I reckon you could do it.
Yeah, I kind of disagree. I think that actually wouldn't be an issue. Like the maps are big enough to fit dojos as they are right now, and there is enough players in battle to cover those. And it also would maybe kind of solve the issue that we were talking about in the previous podcast, where we talk about the creation of lanes where people just funnel into those capture points, and that's the only thing they see. Like, okay, I go for B, I go for B, I go for B, I die and respawn and go for B and go for B, right? Here, when you introduce dojos, that could help spread players more evenly across the battlefield
Yeah,
again,
it could
as
create
it
a
was in
front
the past.
line, essentially.
Yeah, so I think that feature is honestly great for the new game mode. It would be great even for the old game mode. I mean, that's when I already came up with the with the idea of introducing dojos to the War Arena, and they can fit into any game mode really. And even if the developers think that that's not the case, well, they can have dojos in one game mode and not have the dojos in the other game modes. So yeah, but overall, I think they're just really fucking great. Astolfo?
I would like to comment on something George mentioned with where he feels like it could, you know, draw people away from the flags or whatever. I think that's a good thing. Also, I think you need to place them in a place that you still have flanking lanes, because let's face it, flanking was one of the most impactful tactics of the time, right? And if, you can never flank because there's people dotted around everywhere, then that could be an issue. But overall, I love the idea. I think it's great. I think it would actually give cavalry something to skirmish over at the start of the game, right? Like, if you have a cav stopping the other cav from taking the dojo, or even if, it was an archer dojo and the cav could deny it from the enemy team by winning the cav skirmish over it, I think you could do it that way too. I think, it could add almost multiple mini games to the actual game itself, especially for a cav player who will probably either sit around and skirmish on the edge, or wait till it can sneak around and kill arty or archers or something like that, right? Like, it kind of gives cav a true and concrete objective to go for early in the game.
Yeah, that definitely ties into the balance of the game a little bit in terms of, cavalry maybe being superior for fighting of those, but if you place the dojos in appropriate places once the infantry gets there, I think that's resolved. Also, the flanking issue you mentioned, I actually don't think it will be an issue. It never was an issue before when people weren't falling into the lines through capture points. You could easily flank people before, and you will be able to do it as much as you were and are right now. So yeah, I don't really see that becoming an issue. And if it ever does, I mean, you can tweak that. How the dojos work, where they're placed.
Capture speed on specifically dojos so that they can't just deny it every game or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we also talked about it with the previous podcast where we discussed the test. That's the 2.5 hour long one.
That's balance team thing, though. That's not really something we should solve for them.
Yeah, not the feature. And as I said, let's move on. For the time's sake, we're at about 1 hour mark. So, George, what is your next feature?
Well, I think that there's a lot of ways that they've added some kind of sort of veterancy or unit upgrading, or just upgrading anything in the game. But I think that, again, sticking with the Shogun 2 theme, there are ways that you could increase this kind of level of not customization in a cosmetic way, but customization on like a tailoring a unit to your play style. So, for example, in Shogun 2, you have in Avatar Conquest, you have access to the standard units, but you also have access to making your units veterans. And with these veterans, if you don't know already, you can level them up essentially by playing with these units, and then you can assign specific traits, etc., to them. It might be increasing the ammo, which wouldn't be a thing in arena, but increasing like the range or the melee defense or armor or something of the unit. And it could be either outside or inside the game, inside the battles. I would assume outside the battles, like it is in Shogun 2. And again, you could make it just like they've done with the commander trees, which I think they've done really well, where you have these trade-offs and you can't simply just max out a whole tree. And something like that for a unit, you'd be able to have that trade-off between, say, like speed or armor. And I mean, I know which one Mistri would choose, but other people might disagree with him. They might decide they want the armor instead, and something like that.
So you just spill the beans. What I would pick? How dare you?
I did, yeah. I'm trying to think where I was, and so it would add that kind of thing where, rather than just oh, it's another armored legionary. Oh, and he's Caesar and I'm Sulla. Oh, well, that's the only difference between our units. Then having something, just minor tweaks, just like Mistry mentioned earlier with the banners system. Having that additional level of customizability, all these things stacking up together, you could make your unit like quite different from other people's.
Yeah, just as like the idea of banners, I also like the idea of veterancy. But definitely, how I would implement that, right? I would implement it such a way that it doesn't actually favor those who have grinded those veterancy upgrades. So like a fully upgraded veterancy unit is still not better than the base unit from a player who just started playing that unit. It's just different. So I would just give the veterancy bonuses like a set of skills you can pick from, and each of those skills, have their advantages and disadvantages. Or maybe skills is not really the best name for it. Let's just call them upgrades or whatever. Just like you have upgrades with equipment, and that's also one way of distinguishing the units. Where in terms of archers, for example, you have one bow that has shorter range but better damage, and then the other bow that has longer range but worse damage. Have something like that in terms of veterancy as well. So I don't know, have 3 veterancy levels or whatever, and 5 different upgrades to pick from, and you can, after reaching the veterancy level 3, you can pick 3 out of 5 of those, and something like that. And they will still be, balanced. It wouldn't be blown out of proportion, so you couldn't really stack it too much to make the unit broken, maybe something like that. But it would add, a tangible, customizable option for how you want to actually play your units, and also wouldn't make someone crush the other player even though they have the same unit, but just one guy played the unit way more. So that's my input. Astolfo, do you have any?
Don't make speed too overpowered. As a melee infantry, I can tell you if you don't have a charge, your life is already a living hell. So if your general doesn't have a charge on your unit, its speed will exponentially become the strongest stat in the game. But other than that, no, I think it's a good idea.
Okay, that was specific. So anything more to add? I think I don't have anything. George?
No, I think we've covered it pretty well.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next one. Astolfo.
This one's kind of a dual one, customizable active abilities, either for the general or for units. I know you had them in tier 9 and 10. I would like it moved down through the majority, if not all of the tiers, maybe not the first couple, for the unit abilities. Also faction locked. I don't want, testudo barbarians running around. That is completely immersion breaking. Sorry, immersion is a big deal for me in games. And, to have the insane speed of a barbarian unit with a testudo is just
More below gladiators.
Yeah. Clears throat. But yeah, some sort of a customizable thing, maybe with your general too. I know for Hannibal specifically, I played a ton of Hannibal, pretty much my main back in the old arena days. His first ability outside of elephants was really not, I mean, it was nice for getting around the battlefield, but if you got hit by archers, even if you were heavy infantry, you got your health bar obliterated. So, and there was just so many other abilities from Carthage that, you might want to take instead. I wouldn't say be able to change all 3. That would be way too much tailoring. Maybe one general ability, if at all. But, again, this is just, we throw the idea on the wall. They choose whether they want it and how they're going to balance it.
Mm-hmm. So I actually, as you were talking, I had an idea of how to implement it. So back in Steam version, we actually had 4 commander abilities instead of 3. So you could just have a set of 4 abilities and have players pick 3 of them. I mean, the ultimate ability, like like vengeance, like at portas, etc.
Kind of like what
that's locked.
Defines
but
them.
then the 2 other spots, you have 3 abilities to pick there, and pick 2 out of 3, and you can make that work absolutely, as long as you actually properly balance it. Well, that is actually changed the balance of the game itself, quite deeply into it actually. But yeah, idea in general seems cool. More customizable things to generals. I like it. George?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would certainly be an interesting idea. It would be quite a complex one. Like as we discussed, the balancing of it would be quite difficult. I definitely think keeping the ultimate abilities, or however you want to refer to them, as the same would definitely be a good idea. I don't want to see this like ad portas vengeance guy running around. Keep it faction lock, keep it one ultimate.
I mean, I
But
would say keep
certainly,
it general locked, commander
I would
locked in
say
terms of
keep
arena
the
nomenclature.
ultimate locked to the general for sure.
Yeah, so for example, how I would see it, back in the day, Germanicus had his heavy infantry charge, Vengeance, and then he had offensive testudo and defensive testudo. So for example, player could pick between having a defensive or offensive testudo instead of just a testudo. Or maybe he
oh, I
would like
see.
to have two
So,
testudos and no charge, but that would make him pretty stupid.
so,
But hey, go for it
so
if you want.
what you're suggesting is bringing back the commander's fourth abilities and having them as optional with the other two non-ultimates.
Yes, that's what I said even previously. Yes.
Yeah, I
I
didn't
mean, I'm not saying
quite
bring those
understand what you
exactly
said.
back,
Yeah,
especially since for Carthage generals, those didn't exist since they were introduced
yeah, and
in
they
Wargaming
combined
version.
Caesar's like third and fourth with
Yeah,
together,
they
kind of
also
thing.
did that for Caesar. Yeah, so Caesar still kind of has 4 abilities. They're just squished into 3. So then that's a thing as well. But well, if you were to introduce such a massive change, that just shouts entire rebalance, rework of commander abilities entirely. Well, maybe not entirely, but a major part of it.
Maybe you could tailor one ability or something. I don't know how you'd do it. I just remember my first ability on Hannibal. Like if you're not using it on elephants, you're basically using it to get out of your spawn, and then you never touch it again for the rest of the game. Because you're begging to get charged and have half your unit wiped out, or begging to get hit by archers and have half your unit wiped out.
I mean, hey, people were using drop shields and that was irreversible and they were fine. Drop
Yeah,
shields
that's
OP.
true.
I know quite a few people that would like to see that ability back. But yeah, whatever.
Later in the podcast.
If you say so, then go for it.
All right.
Next feature.
Well, I guess. Well, the next feature on the list is some form of general duels that you could do. I think this was probably more of a game mode thing, though. Originally, I thought it as like you could tailor your general to be either a better commander or a fighter, and you could, when you die, instead of just having infinite respawns, maybe make generals fight or something, kind of like Gulag mode. I don't know. Again, that's balance. I just would like to get away from infinite respawns, but again, that's a bias to me, and yeah, I'd say that that's kind of a short point. Just some form of making the general feel at the front.
Okay, I have no idea what you meant by Gulag mode, and I don't think I want to. But in terms of duels, yeah, we have that in Three Kingdoms. They are also considering something like that for Warhammer 3, but they're not even sure about it, the devs themselves. They don't know how it would actually fit and work in Warhammer, given, the balance they have. And in terms of Arena, I actually don't think that would work in Arena. It just doesn't fit.
That's why I mentioned maybe a separate game mode, maybe like a training players game mode. Like a game mode that I've always thought would be good for training players is an unranked game mode where you're all 10 of you are put in an arena map, and you all have one unit, and you can kind of learn the game there. It's also kind of an arcade mode where you can just kind of get in and fight instantly because you're all next to each other. Last man standing wins. It's unranked. No stats are recorded from it. A great way to get in and get out in 5 minutes and have people learn the game, learn the mechanics.
I guess that's a completely different feature. Okay, well, let's George. Any thoughts about the Gulag mode? General duels?
No, I don't know. I haven't really got any thoughts on it, to be honest.
Okay. Well, let's go to the last feature on our list, Astolfo.
Weapon swapping. I loved this in Steam mode. I loved this in even I think it was even in the wargaming section. But drop pikes, drop shields. The more variation, the better. I've always disliked that the only form of spearman I can get on Greece until tier 10 is light infantry or light spears, which light spears pretty much lose to medium spears if you're competent in most fights. Um, but I get that they're meant to be outflanking units, but also spears are phalanx units. So I don't know. The ability to drop your spears and pull out your swords and maybe tailor your units to have better damage with their swords and less damage with their spears. But to balance it out, if you want to drop your pikes, they'll be on the map. You can run back to the same spot and pick them up, or your shields will be on the map. You can pick them up again. Or you can make it a permanent thing where they really have to decide, do I want to drop my pikes and become swordsman with my pikemen? And it's kind of a niche thing, but it definitely expands the ways you can play specifically the Greek faction. But I think everyone could make use of it to some extent.
I mean, yeah, that was just fully a thing in Steam version, not wargaming version though. They went away from it for some reason. I don't know what that reason was, but maybe they felt like that didn't fit, or was bad kind of ability where you commit to dropping shields at the very beginning of the game, like most of the players did, and then never have the shields again. And they felt like it isn't really a good and healthy gameplay. Same way with pikes. So maybe that's why they removed it. And in terms of drop shields, they replaced it with break ranks, which is just a toggleable ability, right? You have break ranks, you run faster, but you're more vulnerable to charges, essentially. Which still means that people are using break ranks 99% of the time and just disable it in very few situations.
I think it was a Militari's exclusive, right?
Both drop
Yes.
shields and break ranks were Miltiades exclusive, yes. In terms of drop pikes, well, that was pikes exclusive.
Yeah.
And you would also just drop pikes and could never get them back again. So that was, also like a commitment thing. Okay, I really need to win this fight in this situation, and the only way for me to win this fight is dropping my pikes. So I want to go for it. It takes, a really conscious decision that maybe not enough people were able to make, and most people would actually make the wrong decision, and they just decided to remove it for that reason.
It would work slightly differently in this version, I feel, because
Well, you could pick them up if you run all the way back.
I know, but in the Steam version, obviously you had the ability to drop your pikes, and as you said, that was more of a I need to drop my pikes to win this fight. Whereas in the current game, it's like, well, I can just respawn if I lose this fight. I can do some damage, but I'll just respawn. Whereas in the Steam version, it was like, right, I'm going to lose this unit. I'm going to be out of the game unless I drop my pikes. So I need to drop my pikes right now, because even though I won't be as effective after the fight, I'll still be able to survive it. I'll still be in the game, that kind of thing. I think that those sort of decisions like that are slightly degraded. I'm not saying like in massively, but certainly in a way I feel it has been.
Also, if we iterate it in the way Astolfo suggested, right, you would have I need to drop the pikes to win this duel, and then I can just pick them up afterwards.
Yeah.
So, well, we are still discussing, the possibility of future game modes, and maybe not every single game mode would have respawns. We don't know where CA is going with this. I mean, we definitely want more game modes, and I imagine CA also. And the question is, how similar or how different will they be? Will every single game mode feature respawn of some sorts, or not? Well, I think at this point of time it's really hard to guess. And yeah, it really depends on what they're going for in terms of the game feeling itself, let's say. But
on a side note, favorite general thing would be cool. Like, have the portrait of your favorite general come up next to you on the list of your scores and stuff.
I don't know, it just shows the general you played. But maybe you have some sort of a portrait, something like in, for example, Gwent. That's the game I know that uses that, but also a lot of other games use that for like an avatar picture or whatever. But well, that's all of the features we had on our wish list that we wrote down before the podcast. Any of you guys maybe have come up with ideas during the podcast that you would like to present, like I kind of did with replays? I mean, I kind of just reminded myself
of
of
the
it.
topic, so I'm just gonna listen and reply.
George, any ideas of your own?
No, I mean, I came up with some good ideas that I hadn't thought about before about things on the list, but no brand new features have popped into my head.
I mean, if you have any additional feedback on something we discussed before and would like to present it, go for it.
No, I think I said my piece at the time.
Okay.
I think I'm happy with what I've said.
Well, so that concludes the podcast. So thank you everyone for watching and listening. And thank you, George. Thank you, Astolfo, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you guys, or hear from you, or you guys will hear us. I don't know. English language is weird. In the next SUNTZU Podcast episode. And maybe in the meantime on Arenas Battlefields. See ya.
Goodbye.
Bye.